So Paris Lees, who's an activist and journalist that we heard together speak last week, said this about your book. I've never been so excited about a book. Thank God somebody finally wrote it. Blistering, absolutely vital, writing from one of the most exciting voices in British politics. A stunning, important debut. Fellow white people, it's our responsibility to read this book. This book is essential reading for anyone, even remotely interested in living in a fairer, kinder, and more equal world. I'm so excited to have you here to talk about this book. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks for having me, Emma.
Yeah, I'm genuinely so excited to be having this conversation, so thank you. So since Our Shed Shelf chose your book, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, as our selection in January, it has since become a bestseller. Your debut book has won the 2018 Jalak Prize, the British Book Award, and the Bread and Roses Award. You've also started a podcast called About Race that continues the conversation. You've clearly been incredibly busy.
It's been a very overwhelming year and a bit, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
How are you feeling, coping?
Well, you know, the book is full of things I wanted to say for such a long time that when it came to publication day in June 2017, I literally thought that's the end of a chapter. I was like, well, that's that done. Oh, it's
finished.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, I'll just go back to my life. But the world is like, no. So I've just sort of spent the last year sort of trying to accept what was happening first and foremost, and then being like, okay, well, what can I do with this? And so it's been interesting. The podcast is really fun to make. I'm excited about the conversations that the book is provoking, and now I feel, you know, a year on, I can sort of step back and be like, wow, I'm proud of what's happening, and I'm really happy to have contributed a small part of this larger conversation.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, got to embrace that train left the station and you had to be on it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But for the first few months, I was like, what is happening? Where is this going?
Yeah, I bet. So coming back to your original blog post, one of the reasons you mentioned that you stopped talking to white people about race was because so many people would get defensive and dismissive and were not even slightly willing to see their own privilege. To me, your initial reaction had a powerful dose of rightful anger and also self-care in it. I'm no longer putting up with this. If you insist on twisting my message or continue to be in deep denial about historical or current context with regards to what's happening around race, then why should I engage? Because the consequences for a person of colour can be really negative. Did I get that right?
You got it spot on. Because, you know, when I wrote that original blog post back it was February 2014, and I remember my life circumstances then. I was, for some reason, sleeping on a mattress because my landlord had not organised a bed, and everything seemed bleak. And I was also very much involved in activism at the time. And let me just say that I wrote that blog post not for want of trying. That came from a good few months of attempting to provoke a conversation about race and racism in my progressive activist circles. And so that blog post was saying, I can't do this anymore, and here are the reasons why. I don't really believe in ghosting, you know, some people, when a situation becomes unbearable, they just disappear. I can't do that. I always have to sort of give an explanation as to why I'm leaving this space, and so that's what I did with that blog post. And I suppose the job of a writer is to try and grab to these what feels sometimes quite intangible emotions. And I was really trying to articulate what it felt to be sometimes, it felt locked in a battle of me trying to say racism exists in these progressive circles, and people in those progressive circles saying, this is all in your head, you're being divisive, etc., etc. So I wrote that blog post. I didn't mention any names. I didn't talk about any particular situations. I just said, this is what it feels to be like this, to be in this situation. I can't do it anymore because it's really hurting my mental health. I press publish. I expect nobody to read it. I'd been writing on that website, on my blog, since I was 19 years old, and nobody really read anything that I had to say. But when I clicked publish on this, it just took on a life of its own. And so many people from all around the world are saying, mood, you know, this is me, I truly resonate with this. Do you know what I mean? And my mind was blown. And also, there was lots of white people who were reading it who would be like, wow, I did not realise that I had been unwittingly taking part in this. And even now, you know, for work, I travel a lot to different parts of the globe, and I still meet people who are like, oh yeah, I definitely remember reading that back in 2014. So, you know, the power of the internet, largely a force for good in that particular circumstance, not always.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just absolutely, you know, blew my mind.
Yeah, I can't imagine. It really picked up some speed. It had crazy momentum.
Yeah, definitely.
So the book kind of feels like it was written as a guide, methodically making your case for people who deny that white supremacy and their own complicity in a racist system exists. You kind of start with irrefutable facts, the brutal history of racism that still is being erased, denied, defended, propped up in our hallowed institutions of knowledge like Oxford and Cambridge. You show how the structural racism is built into our systems and then just like continues to fester. You show how white privilege is insidiously kind of ever present. You tackle so much. You kind of white fears, white feminism, class divisions. You covered so many different topics within this area. But is there anything else since you published the book, since you've been part of these conversations, that you wish you had written about or covered, or like, oh, like I wish I'd put in a paragraph about that?
I'm going to say that that book was a real encapsulation of a lot of my thoughts over the span of a good 7 years. And I don't think there's anything that I didn't cover that I wasn't thinking then. But now I'm really interested in how these things affect our mental health in particular.
Oh, wow.
Because I think that racism really negatively affects your mental health if you are subject to it in a terrifying way. And I think that that's something that we're not speaking openly about.
Yeah.
Probably because, you know, anti-racist movements are, you know, built on this idea of strength and defiance and resistance. And it can be scary sometimes to pipe up and be like, you know what, this is really chipping away at me.
Yeah.
And when I think about that initial blog post that I wrote, it was speaking about the micro and the macro. I was talking about dynamics of society, and I was talking specifically about how that was affecting me and my mental health in particular, because there were times when I was involved in those activist sort of conversations that it literally felt like an onslaught. It felt like I couldn't, you know, open my technology or go to a gathering or a meeting without preparing for some kind of nightmarish battle conversation about whether or not racism exists, you know. And that was having a hugely detrimental effect on my mental health, for sure. But that wasn't something that I was thinking about while I was writing the book. It's only now that I've had some distance that I can be like, you know, that is truly part of the conversation. And I also, you know, now that I have the, you know, huge luck of meeting readers of all races, I have people come to me and basically tell me that they thought they were literally going mad until they read the book or until they read that initial essay. You know, I've had people at signings come to me and cry and say, you know, thank you for validating what I was thinking here. And I'm in an exceedingly fortunate position to, at least like my job is now, everybody knows what my opinions are, like that's part of my job. And I just like feel I'm cut up by people who are in circumstances where that's not the case, but they are still attempting to talk to white denial about race in friendship groups or workplaces and just being made to feel like they're the crazy one, you know?
They're insane, yeah.
So I think that's something that's a key part of the conversation, but that's something that I've only come to the conclusion, you know, some months later.
That's so interesting. And like, I mean, just thinking about how many conversations you've had to have since the release of the book, and even just writing it and everything you've dealt with, like what, have you found any tools that you find help with the constant sort of stress of that? What's given you, what do you use that gives you kind of resilience to deal with it?
I can't tell you that I've been resilient, Emma.
Yeah.
I think for the first few months, like, you know, I said at the beginning of this interview that I was a bit like, and that's because, you know, if you are writing or, you know, engaging in some expression about anti-racism or some injustice in the world, if you come to public prominence for those ideas like I have, so you are seen a little bit like a symbol, and that's scary, you know. Yep. That's true. I'm sure you know.
Yeah.
I'm sure you know.
Yeah.
And you know, people often talk about the hate that you can receive as a symbol, but I would also say the reverence is equally as scary.
Frightening.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because I started to be like looked at as somebody who would have answers, and I was like, I don't really know. I just know how bad this is, and like I can use my skills as a journalist to attempt to expose that, and as a writer to attempt to like speak to the emotions of it. But I can't tell you how to live your life or how to move forward.
And you're like this prophet where everyone's like, so okay, great, you've written this, now give us the answers.
Exactly.
And you're like,
exactly. And I suppose like how I had to like over the last year, how I've built resilience to deal with that is to retreat from the sphere somewhat, and sort of like get in touch with who I am as a human being, rather than a symbol of any particular like, you know, anti-racist discussion. And that's been a learning curve for me for sure. I never felt an obligation to do that, but I was certainly inundated with requests to do so, and I just said no to everything, basically, because you know, one thing that I always say about the book is that the book is like a collection of my very considered thoughts and thinking and research and conclusions over the best part of a decade. They're my really considered opinions based on fact. But not all of my opinions are considered, not by any means, you know. And so I prefer to keep the ill-informed, like, opinions to myself, you know. And I'll talk about that with my friends and family. But it's amazing how I'm called upon to speak on this or that. And I'm like, honestly, I don't believe it's imposter syndrome to say, I don't know about that. And that's something that I'm really like, I'm latching onto this idea of I don't know. Here's what I do know. Here's what I don't know, and just because I know about this doesn't mean that I know about that, and I'm not going to pretend to for the sake of pomposity. That's been a learning curve for me. I don't think I did it at the beginning, but I certainly felt pressure to. And that's been amazing for like a sense of self and a sense of grounding and resilience to hopefully go off and do some more thinking and writing about things.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear you say that, and I found the same thing where it's just like, it's not even pomposity, but it's just like there's just an expectation that you will speak to and speak on things you don't necessarily know about, and actually it's really hard to say no or to not meet people's expectations or be as vocal as people would like you to be. And yeah, that's been a huge part of my self-care and survival as well. So
yeah,
it's
definitely.
Really interesting to hear you say
and
that.
I think that like I call it pomposity because I do feel that there are some people who they take that opportunity and you know. One day you're like, wow, I really enjoy their considered opinions on this, and then like, you always see them in the news, and you're like, hang on, wait a second, this is becoming a little divorce from reality, you know. It's a careful like line to walk, and I'm sure that you've experienced it as well. But I kind of decided that I wanted to say, if I was going to say anything in the public, it was going to be considered and thoughtful, and that way I wouldn't dig myself into a hole.
Yeah, no, 1000%. I cannot relate more. Yeah, amazing. You want to feel like you've got something to say and you've thought about it, and like it's an active thing as opposed to it coming from this weird place of
like
external
riding a wave.
Yeah, totally. The book has had a positive response from white people who seem willing to address the way that they benefit from white supremacy. I also loved it in the feminism question chapter, when you said that white women must question their whiteness just like we question patriarchy. That was such an important line for me, because I definitely had not allocated anywhere near as much time to that question as I had allocated to questioning the patriarchy. From your interviews regarding previous activism with white feminists, I get that that hasn't always been the case, that they haven't kind of done that work as well. And so can you talk more about that?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's quite interesting because like your like piece that you wrote on Our Shared Shelf to sort of intro the book to the book club was really interesting, your self-reflection on that. And then I felt like there was this conversation happening where it's like, right, well, the conversation's over, like Emma Watson has spoken, and like, like racism and feminism is over now. And
wow.
That was the vibe that I was getting from some people, for sure.
Wow. And you're like, I think that's going to solve it overnight, everyone.
Well, I think that's because like you're considered a feminist leader, so it's like people are like, okay, well, Emma said that, so okay, we're cool with it now, right?
Everyone cool? We're cool? Good.
But,
and how did that, like...
well, I was just a bit
how
like...
that makes me feel, but how does that make you feel?
Well, I feel like reading a book is an intensely personal experience, so you're speaking for yourself.
Yeah.
You were speaking for yourself in that.
Yeah, well, I
piece.
went through this like deeply personal, painful like journey with it, and you kind of have to go through that process of like loads of difficult conversations. I went into loads of reading. Like that, me getting to the point of writing that was like, it was a process. Like it was one of those things where I was like, no, hang on a minute. I've been talking about intersectionality and I've been talking about how important that word is, but there's something about like practical application of it and like a deep, like personal experience understanding of something. And it's just different. It's a different connection.
For sure, definitely.
You know, books can take you some of the way, and it's really important to do your own work like that and not expect everyone else to do the labor of explaining things to you. But at the same time,